Zachary went to get Candace.
All right, folks. We're going to go ahead and get started. I appreciate your flexibility. As some of you know, we have a couple of classes tonight starting at 7, so we've got a hard stop time, which is one of the reasons why we want to go ahead and get started. But we're going to have a panel discussion that's not exactly a panel discussion. And what I mean by that is I'm going to ask a few questions of our panelists, who I'll introduce in just a minute. But those questions are also going to be for you all, so that instead of waiting until the panel's done for questions from the audience, we're hoping to have a little more conversation among the people in the room, and we'll have an extra mic in the back for those of you in the audience. And in addition to that, we want an opportunity for you all to ask questions, not only of the panelists, but of one another. So we have most of our panelists here. Dr. Rachel Mikva is our professor of Jewish studies. Rhonda Brown is our vice president for advancement and an artist, one of the people who worked to include art in our event today. You all can go ahead and come on up. Candace Laughinghouse is a PhD student here at Chicago Theological Seminary. Professor Zachary Moon teaches pastoral care and theology. And Sana Syed, who was in a segment of the recording that we heard earlier, is an MA student here at Chicago. So thanks to all of you for being here. Welcome. We've got 2 mics up there for you all to share, if you don't mind passing back and forth. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with a question that is inside CTS, but we're going to move to questions that also go outside CTS, and we're also, if time allows, also going to try to give some consideration to dialogue with people who may not agree with those of us at CTS. So we'll try to cover a few issues here. But the very first question I'm going to ask, and I'm going to pick up actually on a term that I heard in the lunch conversations today, which has to do with the ecology of our commitments at CTS. And I'm going to ask if some of the panelists at least, and you all can be thinking about this too, might start thinking about how our ecology of commitments at CTS can become a resource for us to address the changing, which, as we've learned today, is not completely changing. It's continuous with dynamics in the U.S. Context in which we find ourselves, but also how that ecology of commitments may place a responsibility upon us in that context. So would one of you like to get started on that? This would be the vision, mission, and commitment question. All right, great.
I have a hard time living into silence. It's from my culture. I can't help it. Frequently, our various commitments often get posited as struggles for scarce resources of time and attention, and we at CTS are also sometimes succumb to this kind of dynamic around our various commitments. But that lives in tension with several dynamics, one being a perception and a desire to learn to be accountable to one another, right? To be there in living into our mutual commitments. And secondly, our ecology of commitments has the potential to help us see beyond our own perspective, to broaden the way we understand one issue because of our marginality or perspective or commitment to another. So our commitment to interreligious engagement is illuminated by, especially in this culture and climate of Islamophobia, is illuminated by a long-standing commitment around anti-racism work, right? So we can grow empathically and grow in understanding around diverse issues because of the ecology of commitments. I think the most interesting element of the ecology of our commitments is when they work productively and dynamically to strengthen one another. So one of the examples I give comes from far away, but I think we could bring it home. There's a group called Eco-Peace Middle East, which has an Israeli, a Jordanian, and a Palestinian co-directors, and they use their environmental crises to build also frameworks for trust, understanding, and peaceful coexistence in mutually just relationship. So it's an ecology of commitments where one avenue really enables and strengthens another. And that, I think, is the most exciting and potentially powerful aspect of the ecology of our commitments, which in the vision, mission, and commitment statement is a really long list. And we have to resist the, oh my goodness, how are we going to do it all feeling.
Well, testing, is this on? Okay. Well, being new here to CTS, I intentionally, I came here from another institution, and one of the things that stood out to me, and I spoke about this in another group, was the diversity here on the issues. It reminded me of other institutions I had been to, and I found that it to be important because even with this metaphor that was used, ecology of commitment, I wasn't here today, so earlier this morning, so I don't know how that was like fleshed out, but as how I would define myself as an eco-womanist and looking into ecology, one thing that I can totally see here at CTS, if we're talking about ecology of commitments, is we have this system where everything is growing together. There's a consistent opportunity for growth in each area. There is not a static voice here at CTS. And I think that if we continue to see how each group can benefit from another and grow, we can pull from those resources to help in a time, like you were saying, with issues today with Islamophobia, homophobia, all of these issues that we have the resources here to take out and be able to share within our community, sometimes for some of us within our families, if we're honest, with our co-workers, with our churches, and even just with our neighbors that we have every day. And I think that if we continue to draw on these resources, CTS, will continue to be, as we say on the website, not just radical. We can continue to be early in this. And what that statement says to me is that we're welcoming everyone. Because, not everyone wants to be identified as a radical. For some reason, we're kind of scared of that for a lot of people. But if we have a welcoming way of bringing everyone in and educating them on the many issues that are out there, I think that will, continue to make CTS an even greater place.
I feel like there's this two-pronged approach that we need to take kind of simultaneously. So on the one hand, when we think about ecology and we think about ecosystems, we think about like diverse elements that are somehow in symbiotic relationships. So they're in mutually beneficial relationships that are reinforcing each other. That's how ecosystems work, really. If we look at a lake and we look at the different components of a lake, there is a lot of things that are mutually reinforcing each other to make the thing go. So I definitely feel like the term ecology of commitments is a helpful one and a useful one, and definitely one that we should continue to work with. On the other hand, I also think for a healthy functioning of any system, we also have to look at its individual components and its individual parts and really assess, one, our efforts basically on those components. So if we say our commitments are towards anti-racism, interreligious dialogue, or international relations, or whatever our list of commitments might be, we need to assess our efforts on each of those commitments periodically. So where is our money going? Is our money actually going towards those efforts? What about our time and our energy and our resources? And like at what level are the faculty, students engaging on each of those issues? Like, we need to assess our efforts, and then we need to find a way to measure our impact. And I mean, I think one thing, we do have a very sincere intention, and we are very articulate about our commitments, and sincere self-presentation is a very important piece, because it's not really just that, it's also a way of making ourselves. So when we sincerely present ourselves, we are also simultaneously making ourselves, and then also making ourselves accessible to others, and giving people a way to kind of connect to us. So I think sincere self-presentation is very important, but I do think that a very thorough system to assess efforts and measure impact is very important. How much material are we producing on interreligious work, for instance, academically? How much material are we producing? How many theses are being written on anti-racism work? Like, we have ways to actually assess our impact, and we should kind of capitalize on that.
The way that I think about your question is to say that our greatest strength is also our greatest weakness. As an institution, has a wonderful ecology and diverse body of students and faculty and staff, trustees, all working towards one goal. With what we state about ourselves as an institution, is it also at the same time very difficult to live into that commitment as an institution, and whose, we talk a lot about oppression and whose oppression is more important. And I think some of those things are like an ecosystem, as you've discussed, and how do we measure that, and how do we make sure that everyone's issues feel equally addressed, and there's equity amongst it all. And I think that's very difficult to do in any environment. But the fact that we strive to do that is really important. The fact that we are very bold in our voice, in engaging with the internal community as well as the external community about what we believe in, I think that's really important and a strength of ours.
As I'm listening to this these rich responses to this image around ecology of commitments, I'm also reminded that our commitments and values are not necessarily our practices and our work. And thinking about the kind of education and formation that we seek to do in this place, in this institution, I sense as a member of the faculty that part of my responsibility is not only bestowing this sense of how to be early to things, as Candace said, how can these commitments lead us forward, but also how do we work with one another, each of us carrying the work and the practices and the gifts that each of us have in a way that I think is similar to Dr. Mikva's piece about how these commitments can strengthen each other. My sense is I've seen students who have very different gifts and very different ministries and works and research projects that they're called to strengthen in each other through that relationship. I think our commitments have an opportunity to do that, but ultimately how all of that is lived out through each one of us, and how we, through relationship with each other, come to inspire and affirm and energize and animate and at times cheer for one another and say, my goodness, you have all these gifts that I don't have, and I am in awe of you, and I give thanks to God for God's imagination in creation. That to me, that is when our community seems most alive. In my observation, are these times where we see these moments and these glimpses into work that I feel urgency for. I recognize I can't be the one to do all the work. No one of us can. And yet I look around this room and I experience a sense of peacefulness and hopefulness because I look around this room and I know so much extraordinary work is going to take place through the people who are a part of this community.
Great. I want to see if there are a couple of people in the audience who would like to address this question. As you think about it and get ready to take the mic, I should have said earlier, given our unusual eating situation, that if you decide you want more food, you should just get up and go get it and come back in. Please don't hesitate about that. Anyone in the audience want to pick up on this question or any part of one of the answers you heard? Ken's got the mic back. The other Ken.
You got it?
No, you're good on this one? Dr. Mikva did confess that she does not like silence.
I don't do silence. I mean, you can put me in a place that's made for silence, and I can do it. Being on a platform in front of people doesn't feel like one of those places. I wanted to pick up on something that Dr. Moon said, and I was thinking about it when you reported out from lunch, because you lifted up something very important and similar then. You didn't have quite the opportunity then to offer it in such an inspiring form as you just did. But I feel like for all of the issues that we were trying to address today in our teach-in format, at CTS, we can do this work in a number of ways. We can do the theoretical preparation for analyzing and understanding the world around us through our theological and other religious and spiritual resources. I think we do that piece very, very well. I think we have lots of theses that come out around these issues and try to speak to the moment in powerful ways. We can create the spiritual and emotional context for resilience for the work that everyone is doing, right? And I think we do that part pretty well. I think we can practice with each other to create the community that Dr. Moon just was lifting up for us. I think we do that brilliantly and sporadically. And then we can also be the catalyst and the engine and the channeler for collective work out in the world, rather than just assuming, well, we're all doing it in our own corners and we come together to talk about it and analyze it. And as you know, I keep pushing at that. I would love to see us do more of that. And I think those are different ways of trying to live into our shared spiritual amazing gifts and maximizing their power, their transformative power.
Yes, Shuri. Right up here.
Thank you to the entire panel. My question is, what do you think are the challenges that we face, maybe that you have observed and or experienced?
By we, do you mean CTS?
Yes, here at CTS.
I think one that I feel the most, that I feel like is a great limitation for us is I think we exist in silos. So even though we have a whole range of commitments and we are committed to those, but in practice, I don't feel like we're really doing this ecology thing. That we're really kind of understanding that our issues, that our struggles are actually really connected, and that you know, like they're not separate things. I feel like that's the way they want us to see our issues, as if it's just got to do with us, and this issue is a different issue, and that issue is a different issue, and I think that's part of a more like of a divide and conquer kind of strategy, whereas really our struggles and our issues and injustices are different manifestations of a more unified problem, and I don't know that we're really getting at that. Maybe we are getting at that in our work in our academic work, possibly, but I don't know that we're getting at that in practice. Because if we did get at that in practice, then we wouldn't exist in silos, and we wouldn't just have certain kinds of people showing up for certain kinds of events, and we wouldn't have, like, I think there's a disconnect there, and I think that's a big limitation. The more we feel like, oh, we don't have so much to do with each other in our struggles, the less we're able to do together, actually.
I see it as
Oh,
a
he's got
problem of not knowing enough about each other, not having the educational or epistemological models to get to know more about each other. Rather we go deeper into the exploration of what we've just discovered, our own, the magnitude of our own issues, what we could conceive of as our own issues, and don't know enough about each other, don't know enough about Africa, don't know enough about Korea and North Korea, don't know enough about Israel, Palestine, don't know enough about it, and don't have real models of integrated kinds of education that teach us to know enough, and by knowing enough, caring enough. But we have to care enough to change the model, to make an epistemological break with the way it's been done for hundreds of years.
I think.
Was that a mic drop?
Yeah, the mic drop. Dr. Stone?
Yes, Candace?
To add to both of them, I think that, I know it was Audre Lorde that talked about there's no hierarchy of oppression. And if we get to those moments, and we're talking about intersectionality, that's a hot topic. Everyone is using that now. If we really begin to look at the fact that the oppression that I may be, resisting against is quite similar to what someone else is arguing against, that's where that care comes into place. And then going to, you mentioned, Dr. Mikva, about how we are creating, we're like creators, and I don't know, this may be me putting on my sermon hat, but I was thinking about how as we are made in the image of God, and these ideas and our modes of resistance are things that we have been able to create, and we should be able to use those things that have been created to serve and to help others. And if the ideas and the things that I might be writing on and interested in, I should be able to see how they can service the entire world, the entire community. And that can be in my empathy for what someone else is going through, and then also seeing the connections. So as an African-American woman, for example, many people are aware of my research and looking at, as a womanist perspectives and looking at animals and the mistreatment, and I am going into groups and sharing with people that are predominantly 99.9% white. And for example, I asked a question yesterday, how many of you all have been, besides the conference I was at, how many of you all have been to other conferences on, animal abuse or veganism? Of course, everyone raised their hand. And then I asked people to raise their hand on how many people have been to a Black Lives Matter or any kind of conference relating to other modes of oppression. And then, of course, the hands, didn't raise, not as many hands rose. And so when I began to talk about the issues and the things that I was interested in as a womanist and how African American women are treated and how we have to really focus on our radical subjectivity. We have to love ourselves because of images that are given to us, that images that are placed on us. And I began to show them that the huge connection between how African American women are treated and the continued manipulation of female reproductivity in this whole area that they're talking about, they were, wow, I didn't know. And so I had people coming to me asking me for resources on womanism. And these were people that would have never had any kind of interest, but I was able to go to them, kind of meet them where they were. And so then I had people coming to me, they were writing down, Emily Towns' books, Dr. Floyd Thomas, because I began to share with them, I said, you might not can't be a womanist, but you can learn what the womanist ethics are. And when we can do that amongst ourselves here, what that is I'm using what God had given me and showing that there can be some connections. And because I can't get all the work done by myself, as you mentioned. We know that through the civil rights movement, it was not all African Americans that were getting things done. We need the help of others. And I think that's how we're really going to, get ahead in all of this.
Anyone else on this?
On some of the challenges that exist, yes, I would like to say that funding for theological education is it's a huge challenge that has to be addressed in order for us to sustain ourselves. And that starts internally with students and alumni close after graduation understanding that the gap between tuition and the actual cost to pay for the education is not matching up. And in order for us to meet those goals, we need to develop a group of alumni and folks that just understand the importance of theological education, as well as how the shift is, what is going to happen in the future with how this degree is used, whether in vocation, whether it's in ministry, and what is the expectation from the UCC, for example, who's looking at how to change its formation in ministry. It's all kind of up in the air, and I think that it's important for us to get a hold of that and first start with funding ourselves and becoming self-sustaining, because then the whole world changes for us. It's a big change.
When I think about challenges, particularly thinking about this context, one of the things kind of, it feels like it's almost a cultural dimension for maybe graduate level education, maybe the academy kind of more broadly, that I think CTS is always in a little bit of a tugging match around, kind of back and forth with, is about how, particularly at this level of education, we are all confirmed book people. And I love books, right? And I love knowledge, Dr. Terrell. I love it all day long, all night long. But sometimes, here's what I see us doing when we're in conversation with each other. We got the person and we got the book. and we're talking to each other like this. And maybe it's because the professor told us that the book was the most important thing. Or maybe some teacher a long time ago told us it was the most important thing. Or maybe I'm feeling a little scared, or I'm feeling a little angry, and this feels a little too vulnerable right now. So maybe I'm going to hide behind this right now. But whatever it is that's got us doing this little hiding place kind of thing, behind that book, behind that knowledge, it's hurting us being able to translate that knowledge into the kind of care that Dr. Terrell named. If we are not seeing each other in this space, if we're not seeing each other's bodies, if we are not perceiving that our very being is tied up with the other people who are in this community, that this relationship has everything to do with our own well-being, and particularly if it's because we got too many books up in here, blocking the way from us being able to see one another, then we've got to delve into how that's a cultural challenge for us in a place like this. And I think we need to be able to kind of push back against that a little bit and say, yeah, we're going to get some knowledge, we're going to read some books, we're going to write some books, and I think maybe we're going to write some really good books in a place like this. But I think particularly if we're thinking about movements of social transformation, I think we have to begin to stretch our imaginations beyond expressions that are simply about the production of more books and more words on a page, and begin to realize, and to me, the kind of relational power of witnessing one another. That's when we're talking about seeing each other and the kind of care that gets generated in that moment of recognizing each other in relationship. That's the wellspring from which my sense of regard for someone else and my own realization that I cannot thrive without you thriving begins to just take on such power. And sometimes we're so busy talking about the books or hiding behind the books that we miss that. We miss that opportunity. And when I think about a place like CTS, I think we have to see that as being an active tension between the legitimacy of the academy and the power that the academy has, and the wanting to do right and be responsible to that power. And I also think there's a piece there that we want to say, that's not all the power in the universe. Books don't have all of that. So how do we begin to speak and work and worship and organize in ways that, as I say, are expansively created with more of those multiple expressions of that power beyond the book?
This reminds me a little bit of something Dr. Butler said this morning about, or earlier today, about bringing our skills that, I'm not going to quote you exactly, but bringing our reading skills, our interpreting skills, our exegetical and hermeneutical skills to bear not just on books, but on the world and on each other. And at our table, when this came up again, he referred to the living human document of the people that we're interacting with as requiring that same hermeneutical generosity that we give to our books. I thought that was helpful. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that I'll be honest, when you were just speaking, Dr. Moon, about speaking through books, and I immediately, as a student, I have not yet ascended yet to get all of this, and I was thinking, I don't have a W-2 yet with a job, and the academy is such a place where we all know, for those that go to these conferences, AAR and SBL, it's so much about the books. It's so much about that. And just while you were talking, at first I said, well, I'll be honest, I said, well, he just doesn't know. I mean, when did he get to that mindset? Because this is just not working. This is not going to work for me to get, as my husband says, get a PhD so I can get a JOB. But, but I think at the same time, what this does is, before you were finished, then I said to myself, well, it takes courage to do that. It takes courage to be organic about the type of scholarship that I know can come out of an institution like this. And I think that if we all come together with that courage, just like with anything else that is a situation out there, we see, we see these videos on television, on our computers mostly, where, what would you do? And we always want to see who's going to have the courage to stand up. And I think that that's something that I can be encouraged to do here, is to have that courage to move beyond the books. Now, I'm not going to say it's going to be easy, but I think that's a great model and a huge resource that we can be proud of here.
I don't think it's a binary question, right? The books and that which they transmit and that we can carry as we become text persons. We can bear our texts in accountability and relationship with one another. I think they can be mutually reinforcing, but there is a tension there. Audre Lorde, she also taught us that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, and she was talking about the tools of the academy when she said it, and it applies very broadly, but I think it would be what an amazing experiment to reimagine what theological education really should look like.
I'm not sure if this is exactly a question or kind of a thought triggered by your responses to Cherie's question about challenges. Rhonda mentioned scarcity of financial resources. Candace also alluded to that in terms of jobs. But I thought, I would name, I think some of us, we often feel scarcity of time, too. Tasks that we're talking about feel huge because they are. And I don't know how, as a community, we shepherd our collective time. I don't know if people have thoughts about that.
I think that today's format has been a great use of time. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. All right.
Great use of time to teach theological education in a different format.
That's great.
And the opportunity to reflect. I think we don't get enough time to reflect and really think about the work and the content. We're always rushing to an end. And so the opportunity to really listen and take the time in your schedule to listen is important, especially for us on the administrative side who don't get the richness in the classroom as much as we'd like to. So having, great content is really helpful.
I just am always kind of along these same lines, and to Candace's point about courage, I'm always reminded and struck by one of our partners and what they did a few years ago. Formerly the Fund for Theological Education, now the Forum for Theological Exploration, when they took a year off of their regular activities to rethink who are we in the context of what's happening in theological education. How do we continue to exist? And that took a lot of courage for an institution to stop doing what it normally does in order to reflect on who they are and how we will live into the world and into the discipline, the industry that we are a part of. So that it might be interesting if we talk to the administration, to the trustees and leaders of that organization to just discern and reflect on how they did it and what they gained out of doing that, and then come back and think about what does this institution then need to do.
Helpful. Yeah, Sana?
I think with regards to shepherding our collective time, I think one of the things that would be really helpful would be, there's this whole methodology of conversations called art of hosting. And one of the things they keep talking about is collective intelligence, wanting to kind of harness the collective intelligence in a group, in a space, in an institution, in a people. And I think we need to do more of that, kind of harness our collective intelligence. And I think, like Dr. Terrell said, these kinds of spaces are really helpful. Not necessarily, they don't have to be panels, but if we can actually institutionalize spaces on a monthly or bi-weekly kind of basis where we are actually speaking to each other about things that matter to us, and we're institutionalizing that as our practice, that would also help in creating an ecosystem in the institution, not just an ecology of commitments that we have that we want to take out, beyond the institution, but also building the institution as an ecosystem. And I think if we worked more as an ecosystem, we could be greater than the sum of our parts. But if we don't function as an ecosystem, then we're just kind of the sum of our parts in some sense.
Yes, over here. Do we still have the other mic?
Thank you. I'm thinking of time in our work and how our work is urgent and it needs to happen now, but also how we are building on the generations that came before us and preparing the generations to come. I think at an institution for theological education where some of us might someday become pastors or ministers and teachers, teach other people, how can we prepare people to teach others and in that way continue the work that we are doing here?
Are you phrasing that as a question or a reflection in response to the...
Both, whatever you prefer.
Well, let me take your comment and turn it further into a question, picking up on some of the things that were said earlier, as if our challenges at creating an ecology internally are not challenging enough. We also understand the need to be, that we're part of a larger ecology that includes the places that we'll serve, the communities from which we come, to which we're accountable. How do we bring this type of conversation into those other spaces, both to teach and to get sustenance from, that we bring back here? What are ways that we can do that, and what are particular forms of engagement beyond the seminary that we think are necessary to foster, both for support and as part of our mission?
Yesterday, we had over 250 foundation officers, presidents, Chicago nonprofit leaders, and program developers here at CTS to do some work in racial healing and transformation. So they did the work in a series of circles, which this is a national effort funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. And locally, the Field Foundation and the Woods Fund got just over $1 million from Kellogg to execute this work in Chicago for obvious reasons, because Chicago is having huge challenges with violence and racial issues. What's interesting is that 90% of the audience, when Dr. Nashashibi asked, had you ever been in this space, raised their hand and said no. And interestingly enough, this institution is better prepared than anyone to address those issues. So to answer your question, I think that building a space, for example, with RiotCon, raging issues of today, that helps people understand not only the relevance of seminary work, but the importance of what y'all have been doing and teaching since 162 years now is so important, and it falls it just flies all over me that no one understands that or knows that about CTS. So we are in the process of doing a much better job at getting the word out about what we do and thus establishing the need and the demand. Everybody in this room probably could have been a circle keeper and could have facilitated those conversations. They need to partner with us. They need to fund us, give us their money in order to do this work because we've been doing it for so long. So I think that will help build those teaching opportunities that will help further deepen the understanding that we're relevant and needed.
I think, I'm not sure if you're going to mention this later, but as far as the seminary and those that are, whether practicing, as she was, preachers, pastors, the way that I think, especially today, with how social media has educated and miseducated so many people on issues with politics, that also has everything to do with issues around race, immigration, sexuality, everything. I think that one of the models that we have right now, and I say just one of many, is Reverend William Barber there in North Carolina. The impact that he has had on North Carolina, and I'm still resident living there in Raleigh, I have seen people, moms, stay-at-home moms, a lot of stay-at-home moms that are much more active and aware of the messages that he's not only bringing about politics and about race, but he also incorporates the gospel and he pushes the social gospel. So I think if we become more involved or more vocal, should I say, on the issues relating to politics, whether there are so many groups, I'm sure there are a lot here, that we could just join in and be a part of and just give our voice, because I'm a part of a group called Women Advance NC, and I just haven't had the time to do as much writing for them, but they're really interested in what religion and faith has to say. I mean, maybe that's because it's the South, but I think with us getting involved with politics even more, because politics has the ear of a lot of people, and like I said, whether it's right and wrong, it has the ear of a lot of people, and I think that's how we're going to get the messages that we're writing on, out there even further. We have to get out there and write and talk and go into these groups when they have their meetings or any kind of organizational meetings, because they have them weekly and monthly. And I think that's how we can move beyond the classroom.
Other thoughts about this?
I think we do a fair amount of preparation inside our classrooms, imagining that people will go out there to do this leadership work, right? So, in Hebrew Bible 2, they're going to write a prophetic sermon to go out and change the world with their word, because we all know that when you give a good word, everything changes right away, exactly as you just said. Or we do anti-racism training with our students and our staff and our faculty, and then we take that lens and we try to imagine what it means inside this community, and also how you then take that out and engage difficult conversations and change the world around you. So I think we are trying to apply the learning in small ways, or in significant ways even. I lost my train of thought completely. No, it's not just you. where it was eventually heading, although I think there was something important in the middle I'm going to skip over, is that I don't think we take sufficient advantage of an amazingly fertile context in Chicago, of work that's going on in the world that is not theoretical, that might be informed by, I mean, you know, there could be some synergies there that we can help discover. We have an enormous amount to learn, and our students have an enormous amount to benefit from engaging actual models as part of their theological education. You know, we are trying to find new ways. The Interreligious Institute is one example that's trying to figure out, well, you know what, this interreligious engagement stuff shouldn't happen as a subset of religious studies. It needs to happen. It happens, you know, we have interreligious families, we have interreligious businesses, we have interreligious in every context. So how do we take the skill set that we've developed and develop modules for training to go way beyond the boundaries of theological education? I think we need to find more aspects of our ecology of commitments and more avenues of that translation also.
Sana, you were gonna respond.
I kind of want to just piggyback on that a little bit, because as a member of the e-community cohort, some of the things that we did was going to institutions like, or getting to know institutions like Faith in Place, and there was one, the experimental station, and there were plenty others, and then also this field education that I'm currently doing at Iman. I feel like it really helps to reinforce and reinform and also reimagine what I'm learning here, but then also it's a great way for this exchange and these teaching moments to happen. And the other thing about teaching moments that I wanted to say is that they're not always those big events. So we don't have to be I don't know how to pronounce that word. But there's, you know, those big events that are going to change things, or these big events that's going to cause like this kind of transformation in someone's heart or life, or because in every moment there's that opportunity, and in every encounter there's that opportunity. I just recall this story of this great preacher who was really well known everywhere, and he was giving this amazing sermon, and this man came traveling from like a whole other city for a long, like many days, and by the time he reached, the sermon was finished. And then he went to the preacher and he said, you know, like I traveled like days to hear you, and I missed your sermon. And then the preacher, he gave the same sermon with the same enthusiasm and the same energy and the same everything that he had previously used to deliver to thousands of people. And he didn't make that distinction, oh, this is one person versus that was thousands of people. Because it's the impact. We don't know what's going to topple and you know, cause the impact. It's not necessarily the things that we perceive as big. It could also be like those really small moments. And I feel that I've been taught a lot in those teaching moments that I've had with people here and outside. And I don't feel like, I think when I think about what were the events in my life that made me change, or what is most formative for me, I think I don't remember conferences, I don't remember, but I actually remember people, and I remember moments with those people and things they taught me in those moments. So that's the second part that I felt was also important.
One of the things that reminds me of what Sana just said, although a couple of the other comments too made me think about this. I've always thought that it would be a really fascinating thing if someone could just devote, you know, their year to mapping how all of the people involved at CTS are involved in different places, and groups of people at CTS are involved in places. Local churches, activism groups, support groups, it's field education opportunities and so forth, and kind of build out a map. The IRI is going to do some of this with a little bit of the work, but it seems to me that if we actually had a sense of that map, which would be a kind of ecology of the whole, I suspect that it would be heartening to see the ways in which we're related to the world, but we probably would see some holes too, where we're missing. Yes, over here. Do we still have the mic?
While Mike is traveling, are you offering a student a funded research project? Is that what I heard?
I don't really need a mic because I talk pretty loud.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was sitting here just thinking and thinking and listening, and then the second young lady, Rhonda. Okay, Rhonda kind of sparked something in me when she said that during the workshop or something you went to yesterday, we were doing better than some of the other institutions. So I started thinking, okay, well, that sounds good because I'm hearing a lot of what we ain't doing, but that was good. So I said, okay, so I'm just thinking from a business management perspective because that's where I'm from. So I said, well, what is our strategy? What is our long-term and short-term goals? I need to see everything. And then we need to build on where we're not strong at, put the priorities first where we aren't strong at, and kind of grow those things up. But to me, just listening to everything, we're all over the place. You know, I'm just like, well, how do I jump in and say we need to do this or do that when I'm hearing this and then that? Economics. I'm kind of new to all of us still. I'm just hearing some things that we're just all over the place. If you understand what I'm saying, we need to. I need some strategies or something to let us know what we're missing or where we are, and then we can kind of just jump on some things that's priority first and kind of build up from there, I guess.
Rhonda also said our greatest strength is also our weakness, right? That's not uncommon.
Okay.
Right? So
Right.
the fact that we have multiple commitments, right, to critical issues that kind of cover the planet and from a whole variety of different perspectives. We also, in terms of trying to have a cohesive community, have worked really hard to have access to theological education, even if you can't relocate to Chicago. So we have a whole online program of students who can't physically be here. We have students who work during the day and they can only take night classes. We have students who can only take day classes because they got family to go home to at night. We're in 100 different, we're coming from 100, more than 100, but 100
Right.
different
And
places,
that's gonna be
trying to do 100 different things, and that's why it feels all over the place. Although what you were talking about today and in other efforts was a way to say, how do you take that map and converge that energy and see what bubbles up to the top at the moment? Like, I don't think we can say, this year, we're gonna, make anti-racism our number one priority, and that's the only thing we're going to do. I mean, we could do that, but what happens to the ecology of commitments, unless we're then thinking out loud, we could make them all feed into that. But
Yes.
but I think the ideal is that you get a toolkit with a whole bunch of tools in it.
Right.
And you learn to use each one. But then you have to go figure out what the project is that you are passionate about working on and what tools in that box will fix it. And who around here is going to help you do it.
Right.
And those are kind of on your plate to figure out.
Right, because we're trying to figure out how to fix these. This is all geared towards CTS for our school. Right? So it's like, what's the strategy for figuring out who's good, who has the tools for this versus that? Is that where we are right now, trying to figure out what the strategy is? Or do you have a plan as a group? I mean, just among the people that's up here, you're looking for ideas from us, or do you have something that was planned out, you know, a strategy or something like that? Have you sat down and maybe, you know, put down the points of where we are, what we need, and hand it to us so that we can try and help you better?
So
I don't know.
I can say something to that. I think there's, you know, when we think about process architecture, like how processes really function, I think there are moments of divergence where you just kind of have to go all over the place, and you are assessing everything, and you have to think about everything, and that might take you from here to there, and it might seem a little bit crazy, but I think that's really an important process, because if you don't do that, then it can just be like this all the time. And so the divergence in thought in community is really important, because it allows for a stronger convergence. And I see that you're wanting to see that convergence, and I think we will have that if we do this enough, and if we can have a strategy. We can, you know, but in order to have a strategy that's informed by how we all feel, and that's informed by the reality of our experience, we need to have spaces where we can go and a little all over the place and talk about everything we need to talk about. And yeah, I think that's one. And I forgot the second. So
Yep. At some point, we're going to be faced with something that's a priority, because if you don't find out, if you don't get right to the priority stuff and right to the main sources, you're going to just spin your wheels around and around. Next thing you know, it's a couple of years later and we ain't got nowhere. So at some point, we need to, maybe I'm not explaining it right.
I think the priority, what I see here at CTS, is educating us, like you said, with having that toolbox. And then not only educating us to do the work in the classroom and for the church, but like we were talking about earlier, and getting out there. And if we really look at, and we were talking about, someone mentioned earlier about the generation before and how we're going to educate those after, I think the way that one of the things we have to do, or what we can do to help us, is looking at what was done before. I was helping Dr. Speller on a project, and we were looking at a former president, Ken B. Smith. And I know we have the Rook Society. I mean, he was president of the school much longer, 15 years. And I was looking through the archives at all of his, information, the things that he did with the UCC and traveling, and the things that he did. We would talk about resources here in Chicago with schools. He was on the school board. I mean, the things he did with the Chicago History Museum honoring him. I mean, so many things that this one person did in the area. I mean, he was even on the board with some banks. I mean, everyone could be on the board of a bank. That would be nice. But his involvement in the community was so great, and that's something that we have here that is not going to be, totally unique to us, because we already have people that have gone before us that have done that. And I think that's what CTS is definitely doing compared to, and not that we're living to compare ourselves to other, but honestly, when I look at the activity and what is being done outside of the scholarship, it is great, and we're all going to continue, to grow and move forth in that. So I think, going back to what Dr. Mikva said, is we're getting the tools here now, and I believe our discussion is how are we going to make sure that these tools, that students can take these ideas or take the tools, find what we're passionate about. Because, say for example, I may have aced all of my Old Testament exams. I got the tools. I'm not an Old Testament scholar. I had to find what was passionate for me. And I took whatever else was offered at the institutions where I was at, and that helped me, that helped bring me to where I am, today. So I don't think it's more of a thing where we don't have something that we're focused on, and, then, everything's not going to work out in the end.
So I have to confess, I did not ask when I invited these particular members of our community to speak. I didn't ask them to write our next strategic plan. But it is true that we will be coming up on a time to write another strategic plan in the next couple of years. So identifying our priorities as an institution will be a very important part of that work, I think, rightly so. I want to ask a more difficult question that has to do with engagement. And it's a two-part question. It has to do with, in our current context, our era of neo-Reconstruction, do we, collectively or individually, feel like it's part of our mission to engage people who radically disagree with our theological, political, social perspectives? And if so, because some of us might say yes and some might say no, if so, how do we do that? How do we engage people who completely disagree with some significant subset of our commitments, of our ecology of commitments?
I'll try to speak to that just a little bit. I think what I've been hearing, sort of lots and lots of different folks speaking to, are sort of, who are these people who voted for Trump? And then, if we can sort of see past the fury, then sometimes this question emerges as though, who are these people, and could I find some meaningful ways to be in relationship with them? And I will say to you, in my estimation, those are not the people that I am most concerned about forging relationships with. When I looked at the numbers of who voted for who, the big, like, sirens blaring number was how many people didn't vote in the election at all. And that's where my curiosity, it feels the most compelled when I think about who do I want to build a relationship with, is could I be in relationship with those folks in a way that I could begin to recognize the perhaps systemic factors in their disenfranchisement, in what is left of this illusion, myth, maybe possibility of American democracy that now seems so fraught and fragile in a way that high school civics class, promised me it never would. But those are the people that I think. The other part of this is I have a sort of, perhaps, a little bit, kind of twisted curiosity about talking to people who think very differently than I do, and believe very differently, and maybe vote very differently. For those of you who don't know, I am a pacifist Quaker from the East Bay in one of the most kind of liberal enclaves anywhere in the country. And somehow, maybe a theological thing, I thought that God wanted me to go spend a significant chapter of my life with people who were in the military. And in that moment, much of the community that I had come to know and be familiar and comfortable with said, "No, son, Quaker God doesn't want you to do that." And I had to hold on to the possibility that maybe something more powerful than this Quaker God was nevertheless compelling me to go spend some time with some people who, in my estimation, felt very radically foreign to me. Now, part of my signpost for my own tradition, being the Christian tradition, was to try to imagine how loving a stranger, loving a neighbor, perhaps even loving an enemy, was part of what was demanded of me to try to live faithfully in this world, to be discipled to this particular teacher, Jesus, and what appeared to be ample evidence that those of us who just stayed in comfortable, familiar places might be subject to ridicule by this same teacher, left me feeling as though what white liberal East Bay, pacifist Quakers had left me with was to love your enemy is to convince them of their wrongness and our rightness in this antagonism. And the sharper your rhetoric, the more persuasive I could become through argumentation, I would be able to conquer these wrong-headed enemies, and thereby what could be a more loving act than to save them. And I came to believe that there could possibly be something wrong with that idea. But all of that is somewhat tangential to where I actually feel more energy now, which is I do not think the solution, for example, for the Democratic Party is to reach out to people who voted for Trump. I do not see that as the missed opportunity in what happened in this last election cycle. I see political parties who are so far out of touch with vast constituencies within this country, not to mention the world, that they are so far out of sight, out of mind for those political parties that we have such dramatically few people actually taking part in American democracy. That to me feels like the crisis that I begin to ask the question of, who would I seek to be in relationship with as a citizen of this country and as someone who believes deeply in the power of relationship? I don't think we actually need to imagine how could I befriend someone of radical otherness. I think we may have an opportunity to speak to thousands of people between where we sit today and that Trump supporter. And those people, I think, could be a part of actually emerging from this time, I think, a very real crisis, resembling something like substantive transformation.
I actually have a funny story to tell you. As a part of my job as the fundraiser, I source a lot of foundations through an organization called Forefront. And they've given me a list of all sorts of foundations here in Chicago and across the country that will fund theology. And so I came across one and I went to their website and I said, just because I'm an eternal optimist, I'm going to call them to see if they'll give us a try. And I knew they wouldn't because I just knew that they were completely evangelical, totally on the other side of the spectrum, but I just wanted to call and talk. So I ended up talking to the executive director of the foundation, and I said, so I'm from the Chicago Theological Seminary. Have you heard of us? And he said, yes. And I said, well, and I kind of launched into my spiel, and I said, so I was wondering if your foundation would ever be interested in learning more about the work that we do at CTS and how we educate our students and are bringing the world towards greater justice and mercy. And he said, well, I'm from Wheaton. And I said, well, okay, we're probably on completely opposite ends of the spectrum, and that's fine. But I do believe that there is some opportunity. There has to be some opportunity, especially because when I go to ATS, the training that it's called DIAP. It's Development, something Institutional Advancement Professionals. I can't remember what the D stands for. Do you remember? Development, yeah. Development and Institutional Advancement Professionals, yes. And the more evangelical seminaries are raising money based on the sole idea that they want to retain their way of being, their way of thinking, their delivery, and they raise millions of dollars. And they pray, and Jesus brings the money, and it is just unbelievable. And I'm sitting there in those sessions, and I'm like, huh? That just doesn't happen. And, We serve the same God. So I said to this executive director, I understand that we agree to disagree on a lot of issues, but what if we agreed that love was our primary focus? Could you think, could we find some, level ground on that idea and issue? And he said, I think so. And I said, because if we continue to talk to each other about what we believe in, then this crazy space that we're in the United States is going to continue to happen. And he agreed with me. And he's from Wheaton. So I presume he voted for Donald Trump. But if I decided not to call him, he would never think that some crazy lady from the Chicago Theological Seminary called him and said, would you consider funding us? He probably went to the meeting next day and said, like, they had a big laugh about it. But the point is, we have to find ways to reach across the aisle, as the political folks say, to find some common ground so that we are not existing in this crazy, chaotic space. That's just my opinion. I guess it wasn't that funny.
No, it's a great story. We could also do creation care together. So I feel like we are so proud of the work we put into and our aspirations around navigating so many different kinds of difference that although I agree with you, I would disagree with you about I would say there are many more reasons why people don't vote. And would want to get at the multitude of those. And that's a population I really want to pull in and empower and get them to vote. But it would seem hypocritical almost to not at least think about what it would mean to navigate the difference we don't do as well, which is political difference. In fact, we don't necessarily try. So I felt strongly enough about this that I actually wrote a grant proposal for a project called Interthink. And I had a notion that since we don't already know how to do this, let's do a project where we try to learn how to do this. So we bring 5 young, very different in different ways, right, around all our different kinds of differences, but including political difference, to train them in the skill sets that we do know, in private conversations with them, and then also have them have public conversations around critical questions that would highlight the difference, the political differences, and then talk together about the experience of what it's like to try to engage one another, not to persuade, but to understand one another. That was the project, didn't get funded. But I have to tell you that I wrote the grant proposal before the election. And I felt totally more ready and powerful to do it assuming that Hillary Clinton was going to be president than I feel right now. And part of that is I feel like there are just so many other things I have to work on right this second that I need to focus my energies and make choices. But part of it is a terror that struck deep into my soul about that difference and how equipped I feel to navigate it, and also how ready. I came back over reading week, excuse me. I was at a loose-funded consortium on we're putting out a book together on the pedagogy of interreligious engagement. And a Muslim scholar from GTU in Berkeley talked about how on campus now, the alt-right is coming to him and saying, let's have public conversation together. And he feels enormously conflicted. Also being someone who promotes navigating differences, he recognizes that that conversation is deployed to legitimize racism, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia as a natural part of the political spectrum of discourse in the United States. And he doesn't want to contribute to that. So all of that is to say, before the election, I would have said yes. And now I'm feeling much more conflicted about how I would, not if, I'd still feel like there's some value of consistency and importance both for my own soul and what I might learn and for American polity, right? That we should be able to talk to one another around these differences in civil ways and thoughtful ways. But I'm conflicted.
So we're almost at 7, and I said we had a hard stop time because we've got a couple classes. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask one question that no one can really give a full answer to, but you might like pop out some quick answers. And it's actually the same question that was at the end of the second panel that Dr. Terrell recorded for us. That has to do with sources of hope. What are sources of hope that you feel, that you would just be willing to throw out there?
Mine's really quick. I'm the director of communications, so I work with a lot of you, and telling your stories gives me hope. All the different things where you feel like you can't choose and you need a strategy to go forward, from our office, what we're hearing are all the broad spectrum of things, the work, the ministry, the efforts you're undertaking. And when you come to us and allow us to tell those stories, it does start to tell the story that is CTS. And that will be the body of work, along with all your scholarship, that people in the legacies ahead of, or in the future, come back and look and say, what did they do in this time? So as you're doing your scholarly pursuits and finding time to do your activism, your passion, your work, you can help us by sharing that and telling stories, because that does inspire hope, I think, to me and to the people who read them. And we're getting some lovely letters just from the most recent challenge and response, that the stories in there about what our students and our faculty and our board members are doing in the world give them hope. So tell us your stories. Even though you're so busy doing, try to get us on board to help you tell those stories.
Joanne?
I would say that that my belief in the worth of every person on the planet and the worth, the sacred worth of all people everywhere, regardless of their particularities, even their political particularities. That's not changing. That's not ever going to change. So that's a source of hope to me. My belief that they are worthwhile. But what's also not going to change is my willingness to challenge people who hurt people, and systems that hurt people, and ways of thinking that hurt people. And no matter who it is, and that doesn't stop me from regarding the worth of that person or groups or whatever, but yeah. So the fact that you have, I can speak for myself, I have a well of goodwill towards people. And I know that there are other people who have wells of goodwill in them and who are willing to hear the challenge and willing to hear and learn and grow and change. Because, as I say all the time, if you learn anything at all, you change. Because you have to reorient yourself to truth. So.
I think. I should have just asked Joanne. You make me have hope. This place, the people sitting in this room, help me have hope. It's not the same building I graduated out of. Half of the staff is not the same people. Some of the staff has changed multiple times. Half of the professors are not the same. Half of them are, however. But the efforts to engage in the conversation, even though some of the conversations have changed, the effort to look at those conversations, to have those conversations, to bring people into those conversations, give me hope. Just being here, I've already, and thank you, Charles, again, confronting some of my own issues, even around buying a t-shirt, because can I take that one back and actually wear it into my congregation? I was being selective, and I hate that, but that makes me confront some of my issues and the people that I care for and care of. And all of that gives me hope.
This may be the last one.
Well, you may all be confirmed that I'm officially crazy. I have hope in Donald Trump that he will unify this country against him. We would not be having this conversation if he weren't president. And I really believe that the goodness in this country and the hope that I have in humanity will see what this is, and that he will actually be a unifying force for goodness in this country.
All right. Hope can be a prayer. Oh, Mandy, did you have? Okay, one more. Yeah.
We can't let it end with Donald Trump.
Okay, one, two, and then we really have to honor the folks who have class tonight. So,
I have hope in the young people in this country. The young people in this country give me hope. They are challenging the way we do language and the way we construct our identities, and they are just blurring all the boundaries of everything and getting in there where it's messy and looking around like this is not cool. And I'm getting really well equipped to speak to academics and to understand Augustine, and I'm not really getting very well equipped to speak to the young people who, like, we have a message for these people, and we could do better to share our hope with them and get our hope from them, because they're the people who are going to be doing it, really.
And I guess I'll continue with that. I was going to say that my hope is in children, and that may be from I'm more related to that with having small children. And I think that the messages and things that I bring from school, and I speak with them about deep theological issues on their level. We recently had to put our dog down and having to go through a euthanasia of a pet. And for us to be able to talk about death, and a lot of people told me, don't let your children see that. And I was adamant about wanting them to be there because they got to understand that they could be there and be present when someone that they loved so much, even though it was their dog, and their dog their whole life because he was 12 and my oldest is 7. I think being able to have conversations with them about something that a lot of times we like to think children are too young for that. They're too young to talk about race. No, they're dealing with racist issues. They're dealing with racism at 2 and 3 years old because they are going to school with parents who are racist, and or they're going to school with parents who are building an environment that looks at people who don't look like them and gives them all these impressions of others. And I have hope in children because in my daughter's class after the election, the teacher said to me, because the next day I just couldn't even take my kids to school. I was just totally worn out. But she told me 2 things happened. One, because at the school they have a peace table where if there's a conflict, the children sit down at the table. One child gets to hold the peace flower, and that's their time to talk. And then when they're done, they hand the peace flower to the other person. Well, after the election, someone stabbed the other child with the peace flower. So she was like, it was crazy. But one of the things that I was hopeful in was that there were children that asked questions and that were brave enough. A little girl said, both of my parents voted for Donald Trump. She saw the commercials, but she said, I'm a girl. Another little boy was dealing with the fact that his father was born in Mexico, and he said, is my daddy going to be deported? So we have to talk to them, and that they are sources of hope for me, and that all this work that I'm doing, I'm not going to just wait until young people are young adults to talk to things. We need to talk to these little babies, whether you have children. If you don't, you're going to church. There's a school right across the street. Any child that you come in contact with, and that can be in how you reach out to them and how you speak to them kindly, recognize their feelings and not dismiss them, a whole host of ways. And so I have hope in children because they're so malleable, but at the same time, their innocence is something that I admire.
All right, thank you. Thanks to our panel. Thanks also Dr. Butler, Dr. Trell, Dr. So, the table facilitators, the students who participated both in real time and on tape in the panels. Thanks, and to all of you for a long afternoon. So.